Hello, welcome back to Desperate Living, and this week we're going to catch up on a whole bunch of recently released or about to be released Blu-rays and UHDs, maybe even DVDs. Let's see what we've got sitting around, shall we? But let's kick off with Four Flies on Grey Velvet, the classic Dario Argento giallo, which has just been reissued again by Shameless. You see it comes with the slipcase, cover, double-sided sleeve, and this version is available on both UHD and the Blu-ray. You'll see that I have the Blu-ray here. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. And this version has new interviews with Dario Argento, star Michael Brandon, Luigi Cozzi, English opening and end credits, trailers, etc., etc. But it's also a new 4K restoration of the film. So, you know, if you don't already own Four Flies on Grey Velvet, this is a great opportunity to do so. And if you don't already own Four Flies on Grey Velvet and still need it selling to you, let's see what I can do.
An evening of darkness becomes an eternity of terror and suspense as a killer stalks the streets of a city in search of unsuspecting victims to quench his never-ending thirst for blood.
With the police, they found the maid with her throat cut.
I would definitely describe it as an extreme case of homicidal mania. The patient was here for 3 years. It was our opinion that the patient was completely cured.
I could kill you now, but I won't. I'll wait. Who's going to help you?
An innocent man becomes a target of insanity as he steps into the crosshairs of a homicidal maniac with a need for revenge.
Congratulations. You guessed right.
The killers are homicidal paranoid. Cases like that commit the most horrendous crimes for what appear to be the most insignificant reasons. Stop acting like a baby. Stop crying. You hear? I never want to see you cry. What have you done now? You'll end up in an asylum. Asylum!
Maybe it's all a bad dream. I'm scared. What's the matter? What's happening?
Look, I'm waiting for someone. Now you go out that door and you run.
Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Join us for a journey into the dark and endless caverns of a sick and twisted mind. Join us for a journey into living hell.
So for decades this film was caught up in an awful rights mess, meaning that there were never any legitimate English language VHS or DVD versions available. Fans instead had to make do with Italian or German language bootlegs that were frequently unwatchable, or English language prints that made those versions look HD in comparison. So a DVD did emerge in the US a few years ago, but if you didn't get hold of that, or you just want something considerably better, and why wouldn't you, then the new superior edition from Shameless is most welcome. A long overdue chance to properly assess the missing link in Dario Argento's classic filmography from way back when he was still capable of making good movies. With years of truly awful films in his back catalogue, it's sometimes easy to forget that for just over a decade, Argento was one of the finest filmmakers in the world. And while Four Flies is not maybe the best of his work from this period, it's certainly not the worst. And it still stands head and shoulders above many of the giallo imitators of the time. So the story follows Roberto, played by Michael Brandon, who is the drummer in the sort of band who would probably have scored Argento's later films if Goblin hadn't existed. and who becomes involved in a murder mystery after confronting a man who he thinks is following him. After a somewhat unconvincing struggle, the man is killed with his own knife, and the whole incident is photographed by a masked figure, who then starts sending Roberto photos and other incriminating evidence. Not as blackmail, it seems, simply just to taunt him. As the threats start to escalate into the murder of people around him, Roberto tries to find out who is behind the crimes, while his wife Nina, played by Mimsy Farmer, tries to convince him to drop it and move away. In typical Argento, and indeed typical wider giallo style, the investigation leads to assorted red herrings, dead ends and visual flourishes, alongside some clumsy attempts at psychological insight, something that Argento has a bad habit of doing, before the murderer's identity is finally revealed. This final twist might not come as much of a surprise to anyone who's seen Argento's other giallos, which have long since prepared the viewers for such a revelation. And I doubt if many people will fail to guess the identity of the murderer long before the film ends in any case. Interestingly, while Four Flies is the final part of Argento's Animals trilogy of film titles after The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and The Cat o' Nine Tails, it also feels like something of a dry run for many of the ideas that would eventually evolve in his next movie, the giallo masterpiece Deep Red. The musician caught in a deepening mystery would be returned to in that film, and many of the consciously stylish visual flourishes that are tested out here would be refined there, albeit in gorier style. Even the mask worn by the killer is reminiscent of the Clockwork Dummy in Deep Red, and both films feature a dramatic finale involving a road accident. It must be said that the final moments here are extraordinary, a piece of extravagant and daring filmmaking that remains amongst the best of Argento's work. It's also a very self-conscious moment, the sort of set piece that he would increasingly use and which audiences increasingly expected. I think this sort of thing would eventually become something of a noose around Argento's neck, increasingly reducing his films to a series of moments that didn't quite hold together as a narrative, finally becoming the one scene that critics could desperately point to in his increasingly awful films as evidence that he still had it. Four Flies is a much underrated film, perhaps one that fans were inevitably disappointed with when they finally caught up with it after all those years, because nothing could quite match the film that they'd anticipated. It suffers because it isn't quite up to the standard of Deep Red. Some ham-fisted humour is out of place, and eccentric characters seem more irritating than entertaining, though admittedly these are both faults in Deep Red too, especially in the longer Italian version. There's pretty bad dubbing in the default English language version, reducing the performance of several actors, though both versions have a rather hysterical climax that comes close to sliding into camp as the killer's rather unconvincing motives are revealed. As is the case with many of Argento's giallo films, the plot makes no sense at all. You could drive a bus through the plot holes, but it tries to sweep you along with its own internal logic. And having said that, there's a lot here to admire. Audacious moments of imagery that are painfully self-conscious but equally nevertheless impressive, especially for the time. Ennio Morricone's score that flits between the light and fluffy soundtracks that would later become favourites of the easy listening revival, and post-prog workouts that hint at the Goblin score to come in Deep Red. And some scenes of genuine tension. Michael Brandon might be a rather dull, one-dimensional hero, but on that score he's no different than most of the Argento male leads, who were rarely more than mannequins on which to hang the story. If we compare this to Cat o' Nine Tails, it feels like the work of a filmmaker who was moving forward, becoming more confident, and on the path to great things. Which of course he was. In the end, Four Flies on Grey Velvet is one of those movies that's both overrated and underrated, often by the same people. Argento's hardcore fans, the sort who claim that his post-1980s work is still great cinema rather than cack-handed self-imitation from a filmmaker whose visionary talent has long since been burned out, are often curiously dismissive of this film, seeing it as filler between Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Deep Red, while others hail it as superior to other giallo simply because of who made it. I'd certainly place this in the top echelons of the gialli, but it's not as good a film as something like Who Saw Her Die, for instance, another shameless release that I reviewed a while back. Is it essential? Well, yeah, with slight reservations. It's probably not the film to introduce the genre to newbies with, but I think fans will find it very worthwhile, especially if they can forget about the whole Argento baggage that comes with it and just take it on face value. Looked at that way, it's an impressive, tense, exciting thriller. Well worth picking up. So as I said, this is not the first edition of the film to appear on Blu-ray, even from Shameless. It's an upgrade, if you like. Obviously, I would imagine that the main reason you would want to buy this as an upgrade would be for the UHD. If you're interested in this movie, you probably already got the Blu-ray. But if not, then this Blu-ray edition is certainly well worth picking up itself. The UHD, I'm sure, looks and sounds spectacular. To be fair, so does the Blu-ray. And if you've maybe dismissed this movie in the past, which I have occasionally, I've fallen into that trap of perhaps seeing it as a lesser Argento from the period when he was still good, then I think checking it out again actually shows you that it has a lot going for it. Fantastic score, interesting narrative, some brilliant visuals. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on Four Flies on Grey Velvet, on Dario Argento as a filmmaker, and on the Giallo movie. Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.